for inviting us and for this opportunity to speak on missionary discipleship and a Lasallian response to missionary discipleship. As we begin with all things, we will begin with prayer, and our prayer this evening is taken from the Gospel of Luke. And so let us remember that we are in the holy presence of God. That very day, the first day of the week, 2 of Jesus' disciples were going to a village 7 miles from Jerusalem called Emmaus, and they were conversing about all the things that had occurred. And it happened that while they were conversing and debating, Jesus himself drew near and walked with them, but their eyes were prevented from recognizing him.
He asked them, "What are you discussing as you walk along?" They stopped, looking downcast. One of them, named Cleopas, said to him in reply, "Are you the only visitor to Jerusalem who does not know the things that have taken place there in these days?" And he replied to them, "What sort of things?"
They said to him, "The things that happened to Jesus the Nazarene, who was a prophet, mighty in deed and word before God and all the people, how our chief priests and rulers both handed him over to a sentence of death and crucified him. But we were hoping that he would be the one to redeem Israel. And besides all this, it is now the 3rd day since this took place. Some women from our group, however, have astounded us. They were at the tomb early in the morning and did not find his body. They came back and reported that they have indeed seen a vision of angels who announced that he was alive."
Then some of those with us went to the tomb and found things just as the women had described. But him they did not see. And he said to them, "Oh, how foolish you are, how slow of heart to believe all that the prophets spoke. Was it not necessary that the Christ should suffer these things and enter into his glory?" Then, beginning with Moses and all the prophets, he interpreted to them what referred to him in all the scriptures.
As they approached the village to which they were going, he gave the impression that he was going on further. But they urged him, "Stay with us, for it is nearly evening and the day is almost over." So he went in to stay with them, and it happened that while he was with them at table, he took bread, said the blessing, broke it, and gave it to them.
With that, their eyes were opened, and they recognized him, but he vanished from their sight. Then they said to each other, "Were not our hearts burning within us while he spoke to us on the way and opened the scriptures to us?" So they set out at once and returned to Jerusalem, where they found gathered together the 11 and those with them who were saying, "The Lord has truly been raised and has appeared to Simon." Then the 2 recounted what had taken place on the way and how he was made known to them in the breaking of bread. Gracious God, as we come together to learn and to grow in our understanding of you and in our understanding of our mission as disciples, we just ask for your blessing upon our time, that it may be fruitful, and that all that we share will continue to enrich and enliven the hearts of the young people that are entrusted to us. We make this prayer in your holy name. Amen.
Amen.
St. John Baptist de La Salle,
Pray for us.
live Jesus in our hearts forever. Well, thank you everyone for joining us. Kenenna and I had a lot of fun working on this particular presentation together. And it all began with a couple of webinars, a couple back, where we started to talk a little bit about what we were hearing from Charlotte and from Paul, and what then could we take from that and apply it to our particular circumstance as Lasallian educators. And so as we were conversing, we discovered a roadmap that we thought could really be helpful for us as we try to navigate the present culture and the challenge of discipleship that the church has right now, especially with regards to everything that's happening in secular society. So the framework really came to us from reflecting on this gospel passage, this idea of remembering, recognizing, and responding. And so as we go through this presentation, you'll see those words come up a few times because they definitely are a way for us to enter into a critical reflection on how we can be more intentional about forming disciples in the mission of Christ. So Kenenna will talk a little bit more about that, but we wanted to point that out to you because you'll see those words on slides and we'll be making reference to that. And they come directly from the story in the prayer that we just read. We'll talk a little bit about missionary discipleship, especially as it pertains to the apostolic exhortation of Pope Francis, Evangelii Gaudium. We'll connect that to our work with this current generation titled Generation Z, and do a little bit of visiting some work that Charlotte did in terms of how we should respond. And we want to take that information and use it to then apply to this framework of the Emmaus story, and then how our Lasallian and heritage and experience can help us to be able to navigate our future. The bulk of what we want to do today is to spend a really good 25 to 30 minutes in reflection and discussion together to allow us the opportunity to really get our heads around and actually start to think about how we can make intentional steps towards practicing this missionary discipleship. So be prepared for that. We've got some starter questions that we think are going to help us to be able to engage in a very rich conversation to help us to be able to make that application to our respective settings. So I'm going to go ahead and start us off with Evangelii Gaudium. When I think back to the presentations that Charlotte and Paul gave, we were looking at a particular context, especially in terms of the life of young people and how that is interfacing with the current state of the church. For us who are agents of the church, there is definitely a place for us where we have to exercise some responsibility in carrying on this particular mission. And so I went back and skimmed through Evangelii Gaudium, did reading of certain aspects of it that I thought were very relevant to this topic of the Lasallian application to missionary discipleship. And the thing that really struck me in the document was this most important question. What is the quality of our interior life? I think that our Catholic and Lasallian heritage really help us to find guidance and encouragement, not only from this apostolic exhortation from Pope Francis, but also from some meditations of De La Salle. And one meditation in particular caught my eye. It's the meditation for the feast of St. James and St. Philip the Apostles that was just last week. And in that particular meditation, De La Salle writes, "In your work, you have a special need for zeal for the salvation of souls." And the thing that caught me in that particular meditation was this invitation to really reflect on my interior life as a Lasallian educator. And how does that then begin the process for my being able to reach out beyond myself to what I think I would term missionary territory, which is the group of young people that I'm ministering with on a day-to-day basis. And collectively, this generation that is in a specific place and time with very specific gifts, but also some very specific needs and wants. As I reflected on that particular question and on De La Salle's encouragement, there's this reminder to all of us that we are agents of evangelization. And so as we enter into this, there's an application to each of our lives with regards to how are we going to engage this question and to what extent are we going to engage it. And beyond the thought around the question, how are we going to act? How are we going to respond? And really try to seek out ways that bring the gospel to some relevancy in the lives of young people. In order for us to really be able to do this well, I think there's this constant call for us to renew our encounter with Christ, that to understand that we are his beloved, should give us some inspiration and a joy in faith that really fuels the zeal that De La Salle is talking about. So for us, it's about how it is that we encounter, re-encounter, and enter into the paschal mystery of Jesus and interpret that in our experience, but also look how the paschal mystery is at work in the lives of our young people and our students. So evangelization seeks to communicate more effectively the truth of the gospel in a specific context. This notion of context is going to reappear a few times today because context is important to how it is that we are going to apply ourselves to our unique situations and circumstances. So as you go through this, as I speak or Kenenna speaks, we're going to invite you to really think about your local context and what are the applications that you see as relevant to the young people that you work with in the community that is your particular pastoral setting. Pope Francis really reminds us that there are certain challenges that the current culture is pressing upon us. And he notes in one particular section titled Crisis of Communal Commitment that the secularization of society is leading to a breakdown of our notion of community. And some of the things that are affecting that that sense of committing to community are exclusion and inequality, that we are creating circumstances where some people are going to be left out and where some people who are even in are not necessarily seen with the same value set as others. And so this exclusion and inequality creates a lack of relationship and even a sense of kind of dehumanization of people. So we start to look at people as commodity as opposed to humanity. The second crisis that he refers to is that the value of money is rearing its ugly head, and because of that, we are placing more value in the accumulation of dollars and property more than we are in the support and building up of the community through the people that we interact with and relate with. That challenge and the exclusion challenge then lead to a greater prevalence of violence in our present day and age. And whether that's the violence of words in how people speak to each other, or the violence of physical, sexual abuse, all those kinds of violences are making themselves more known in the current day and age. And those things are getting in the way of our ability to really be authentic Christian community. So in a nutshell, all of these things that are breaking down or becoming obstacles to communal commitment also reduce faith. And the idea that in community where two or three are gathered, it's really hard to see that when folks are really trying to move from a place of selfishness than a place of selflessness. And so when we look at this particular set of challenges, our own charism as a Lasallian family flies in the face of what the current society is trying to do. So we have something to offer in regards to these sets of cultural challenges. Pope Francis encourages us that we need to look at dialoguing about faith in a way that really connects with the entire experience of people. Not only their personal experience and the things that humanity experiences on a day-to-day basis, but also in terms of their knowledge and understanding, especially in our understanding of the world around us and how it works. Somehow this dialogue of the human experience with the scientific experience with the experience of God is what's going to help us to actually be able to understand how we should respond to the challenges that we face. So for us, we're trying to develop a particular pastoral response to the needs of this particular generation, Generation Z, and the upcoming generations of young people. And somehow or another, what we have as a community offers a very different reality than what young people are currently experiencing. So when it comes to missionary discipleship and young people specifically, Pope Francis definitely sees in them a great possibility for them to accept the call to missionary discipleship and to be the ones who help go to the margins and the far reaches where they can reach their peers. But he does name a particular concern that he has, which is that young people, in their quest for understanding and their desire for someone to care for them and for their search for meaning and purpose, is anyone really listening to them? Is anyone really walking with them? Is anyone taking the time to immerse themselves in the difficulties and the problems that young people face and tries to understand where they're coming from? Until we're able to really maximize our ability to build on those relationships, my sense is that some of these challenges are going to be fairly overwhelming. And yet, the exciting part of this, and the part that really is a passion for me, is that we have the capacity as a community to be able to address the needs that this particular generation has. Pope Francis also recognizes that there has been a particular set of progresses that have been made. The one is the sense that no one aspect of the community can do the entirety of evangelizing and educating. That there is a family approach, a community approach that needs to be exercised. And just coming to that understanding is the first point. The second point is to identify strategies that help us to be able to provide the kind of education and evangelization that is attractive to Generation Z. Another aspect of progress is this recognition that the giftedness of young people can be placed in service to the church and to the world, and that if we can tap into the great resource that is young people and help to encourage them to use their gifts to better society, that is something that they can find in themselves the role of missionary and disciple. So the capacity is there. The question is, how is it tapped, and how are we facilitating that? How are we guiding young people towards it? How are we helping them to gain a self-understanding of their power as missionary disciples? Charlotte presented a list of ways that we could respond to Generation Z. And one of the ways she said is to just really think about how we communicate and the ways in which we communicate. For this particular generation, relational communication comes across multiple platforms that aren't just face-to-face. We're using one right now. And how it is that we access these platforms and understand them, master them, and use them to help us connect with young people will be an aid to making the connections that are very real and authentic for young people. We also need to connect with them through image. So much of their experience of the world is through the visual. So how it is that we make ourselves known to them and make the gospel message known to them in pictures is really, really important. So whether that's through video resources, whether that's through storytelling, whether that is through art, there are ways that we can stimulate their reflection on what it means to be a disciple of Jesus, and how does that play out for them. This content of communication needs to be provided, though, not in an overwhelming sense. And I kind of relate this to my experience of confirmation preparation in my parish, that there's this urgency to communicate the entirety of the gospel in 32 sessions. And because of that, what is a lifetime of learning and a lifetime of experience and coming to grow as a Catholic, we try to put it all into a small amount of time. And that's overwhelming for young people. So we have to make it more realistic for them to take something and wrestle with it, for them to be able to chew on it so that they can really savor it and begin to apply it in their own circumstance. This particular generation is very diverse, And how is it that we see that diversity as gift and not try to come up with solutions or strategies that are one size fits all? Because in reality, their diversity is going to indicate a number of different ways and a number of different entry points to provide some sort of ministry to them. Whenever I think about this, I think back to St. John Paul II and his desire to have holy doors be the symbol of the new millennium in the year 2000, which seems many, many moons ago. But the image really sticks. When we think about this diversity, how are we as church opening as many holy doors for young people so that young people don't feel like they have to cram in only through one way, but that there are a variety of ways for them to be able to come into the church, that there are a variety of ways for them to encounter Jesus. And so how do we see multiple ways to provide them that accessibility? The other piece of this is how it is that we relate to them in terms of treating them as adults. Charlotte mentioned that this is a very mature generation, and that maturity leads them to contemplate questions that are much deeper than previous generations. So we can actually engage in conversations with them that are much more spiritually deep, they're definitely more challenging, and we don't have to keep things at the surface because they're capable of doing more. They also have a sense of curiosity, and one of the things that I've found with young people is that they're curious about how it is that all of this service that we try to offer and the things that we try to give to people, how it is that makes a difference for them and the contribution that they make in the world. So we have an opportunity to actually feed this generation's curiosity. Looking at this particular generation, some statistics that were presented really caught my eye in terms of starting points for us to respond. One is that 90% of this particular generation feels called to make a difference in the world. And because of that, they're more interested in the resolution of the issue rather than just providing a service. So what that means is that helping them to understand what's going on behind a particular need and helping them to see how they can address the cause of that need is something that they're willing to give their time and their energy to. This is because they're very aware. They want to take advantage of their skills and talents in order to shape the world that they live in order to shape the church that they experience. And our task then is how do we help them cultivate that awareness by giving them experiences that help them to do meaningful stuff, especially in terms of resolution and moving to a better place or a more positive place. Pope Francis mentions that schools are a valuable resource for this evangelization of culture, and that we have the opportunity to explicitly proclaim the gospel with young people and encourage them to be able to go out and to become disciples themselves. There are a variety of different ways for us to be able to do that in our respective setting, but there is a particular framework that we can use to be able to help us understand where it is that we can start. So I'm going to turn things over to Kenenna, and she's going to review that framework with us.
So as we continue our journey together this evening, I invite you to call to mind our opening prayer and the encounter that Cleopas and the other disciple had with Jesus on the road to Emmaus. This story provides a potential approach through which we can act and respond as missionary disciples in the Lasallian context. To aid us in this approach, I offer to you 3 lenses through which we will explore and examine the road to Emmaus. Those lenses are remembrance, recognition, and response. So in thinking of remembrance, just take a moment to place yourself on the road to Emmaus to try and internalize the mind frame that the disciples would have been in at that time. Keeping in mind that Jesus has just died, has just been crucified, he's been buried, And now there are rumors and accounts circulating about his resurrection, yet his body is nowhere to be found. In reflecting on this, I could easily imagine that in addition to being perplexed, potentially frightened, the disciples might also be hopeful, and they're grappling with many questions as they continue on their way. This grappling and the conversations that they were having amongst themselves set the stage for Christ to enter. While they were remembering and questioning, and once Christ entered, the initial response was they were incredulous, asking, who is this stranger who does not know what has transpired in Jerusalem, what has transpired in the recent days. But Jesus, in his response or in his interaction to them, continues to ask questions, takes the time to truly listen to the disciples, to the worries and the questions that they were carrying with them at that time. Just as Jesus took that time to listen to the disciples, we as Lasallian educators are continually invited to listen, to be present, to really journey with those entrusted to our care, whether it be our students or our colleagues. In taking time to listen to them, Jesus was better able to understand the language and terminology where they were coming from. And in understanding where they were coming from, he spoke and broke open the scripture in a sense in bite-sized chunks in a way that they were able to more fully interpret, more fully understand, more fully internalize, so that the words that they might have heard from Christ when he was alive and walked with them took on new meaning as they were walking with the risen Savior. Remembering that we are in the holy presence of God puts us in a posture and a disposition to listen. I believe that that's in many ways why LaSalle really emphasized the importance of taking time throughout the day to remember that we're in the holy presence of God. Likewise, the true disciples, when they took that time to remember and reflect, even amidst their worries and the questions they were grappling with, they set the stage for Jesus to physically manifest himself on the road to Emmaus. And I believe that as Lasallian educators, this is a tangible way in which we are called to live as missionary disciples, to be truly present, to see our students, and to let them know that they are being seen, that they are being listened to, that they're being recognized. I think St. LaSalle puts this in a very powerful and beautiful way in the Meditations 195.2, when he says, they must also be convinced that they are a letter that Jesus Christ dictates to you, which you write each day in their heart, not with ink, but by the Spirit of the living God. So when we pray as a community, as we did at the start of our time together, we begin by reminding ourselves that we are always in the holy presence of a loving God. And we open the veil, in a sense, between the ordinary and the extraordinary. Just as the disciples were traveling, which is a part of our daily experiences, in that seemingly ordinary moment, Jesus entered. So in our ordinary moments, daily ordinary moments, whether it be in a lesson taught, a conversation had with a student or a colleague, a burden shared, or on the road to Emmaus, we have countless opportunities to encounter Christ, to recognize Christ. And this brings us to recognition. So even though Cleopas and the other disciple didn't initially recognize the person of Christ, I believe they recognized his essence. There were certain qualities and characteristics that they recognized before they were physically able to see Christ himself. One of the ways that they were able to start their journey of recognition, we could say, is in the words that Jesus spoke to them. The Gospel of Luke says, with that their eyes were opened and they recognized him. Then they said to each other, were not our hearts burning within us while he spoke to us on the way and opened the scriptures to us? As we reflect on our own experiences, it begets the question, how do we allow the hearts of our students to burn within them? Do we give opportunities to really open and the word or the scripture or their experiences in order to allow them to reach newer levels of understanding? Are they able to recognize the one in whose name we live out our mission through our words and our actions? In that recognition, we're able to remember the words which Christ spoke to them, so much so that a stranger was able to who journeyed along with them, was really able to allow them to reach, again, newer levels of understanding. In De La Salle's meditations, we are reminded of the importance of recognizing Jesus beneath the poor rags of the children whom you have to instruct, to adore him in them, to adore Christ in them. So what are these poor rags? I think sometimes we can, when we hear this meditation, or when we look at this meditation, it's easy to only focus on economic poverty. But we have an opportunity to go beyond that. The poor rags can take on so many different forms, whether it be in someone's economic circumstances, or that student that just behaviorally is not being attentive in class, or the colleague who doesn't seem to be engaged. All of these are in different forms poor rags. Regardless, we are called to recognize Christ beneath that and to adore Christ in that circumstance and in that situation. If we don't take the time to adore Christ in the other, how then will we give one another or that person an opportunity to then be able to recognize Christ in us, to then be able to be that witness who takes a chance encounter and turns it into something extraordinary? And this brings us on our journey then to response. How are we called to respond as ambassadors and ministers of Jesus Christ in the work that we do? How are we called to respond as missionary disciples? I believe that the process as we begin to answer this is, again, through recognition, remembrance, and response. Through remembrance and prayer, conversation with God, which the disciples did, they were conversing with God along the way. It was that prayer that they made along the way, I believe, that predisposed them to be able to recognize Christ in the breaking of the bread. If that conversation and journey and prayer did not happen, would they have been in the right space, in the right frame to be able to see Christ when he broke bread with them? So through those steps that the disciples took, they didn't let their experience and their encounter with Christ stop there. One could easily say that having an opportunity to dine with the risen Savior is a mountaintop experience. But they didn't stay atop the mountain. The disciples chose to respond. So they set out at once and returned to Jerusalem. Not only did they return, they took that response a step further. They recounted what had taken place on the way and how he was made known to them in the breaking of the bread. How are we called to take our responses another step further? How are we called to journey with our students beyond their mountaintop experiences, whether it be a retreat or an immersion or a service opportunity? How do we help them, form them as leaders to be a part of finding the root causes of different problems in our world and being a part of that ongoing response? I think there's a powerful opportunity there. And we in turn had that opportunity because we as ambassadors and ministers of Jesus Christ in the work that we do must act as representing Christ. So then how do we represent Christ and continue to respond to those entrusted to our care? I believe that the road to Emmaus provides such a powerful picture and example of that. And one of the most tangible ways in which we can be present to one another is by simply being present. I think in our world today where we're so connected technologically, it's easy to look for a grander solution, to say, oh, there's a different way that we can reach Generation Z. There's a different way that we can catch and attract them. I think one of the powerful ways, which is also central to our identity as Lasallians, is through relationship. Being older brothers and older sisters to our students, but also brothers and sisters to one another. Really being present and in relationship. I think that's going to be one of the powerful ways that we can continue our response as missionary disciples in forming missionary disciples. It's something that we're already doing in many cases in our schools, in our ministry, but it's also an opportunity to use what we're already doing as a starting point for the journey that continues. This journey that will incorporate remembrance, recognition, and response.
So with all of that reflection on the apostolic exhortation, the current situation that we face with Generation Z, and then reflecting on our own story as Lasallians. A quick word about situational context, and then we just have some questions that we'd love for people to just begin to dialogue on as we all start to try to take to heart how we can exercise missionary discipleship wherever we minister. I think one of the things that's really important about situational context is that the invitation to and the practice of missionary discipleship is likely going to differ depending on our pastoral setting. So while we all face the same challenges of the culture of the day, we have to look specifically at where we live and who we're living with to be able to walk in the way that Jesus did with Cleopas and the other disciple. So there may be some differences in the approaches that our various communities take with regards to encouraging and practicing missionary discipleship. That's okay. The promise is that the presence of Christ is going to help us to get to that place of recognition and response. But we have to do a little bit of work in terms of saying, where shall we begin? And that's the question that we leave with you. Where shall we begin? So we pose some questions here under these different aspects of the framework in which to think about missionary discipleship. Remember, recognize, and respond. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to invite us to about 20 seconds of silence just to review the questions. And if there's a particular question that is tugging at your heart, just respond to that particular question. And we'll just sort of just get wherever folks are at. Offer what it is that you're thinking about based on what you've heard or what you've been dealing with in your own local situation or in whatever aspect of ministering with young people through this Lasallian endeavor. Okay, so with that little bit of time, what questions struck you with some sort of thought? And please feel free to share it with the rest of us so we might learn from your wisdom.
Stan, I think there's someone on the phone, so can I just read the questions out loud? I'm sorry, so that they can know what those questions are. Do you remember a time when your heart was on fire because you were living as a missionary disciple? What have you been journeying with, been called to remember from the previous webinars? Recognize. What do you recognize is already working in your ministry context to inspire missionary discipleship? What do you see as challenges, obstacles, or threats to advancing the cause of missionary discipleship? Respond. What does your local context need to keep doing? What do we need to stop doing? What do we need to start doing?
What are you thinking out there?
And as we look at the maybe starting with the remember component, whether it be these questions that strike you or sorry, is someone speaking?
Greg can't seem to hear it.
Yeah, I can you hear me now? Okay.
Yes.
Okay, yeah, I was trying to say something before, but I was muted. So I just said the question that came up for me in the remember piece, Kenenna, as you were saying, is the what have I been journeying with or been called to remember from the previous webinars? And what's a consistent theme for me in the 3 webinars has been a call to build relationships with young people and with adults with whom we work. Your notion of being brothers and sisters to one another and older brothers and sisters, the young people entrusted to us. I work mostly with adults now, but I worked with young people for years. And it seems to me that it's so important to see people right here and right now. With young folks, I get tired of church messages saying that they're the future of the church. They're the today of the church. Yeah, they're the future, but they're the today. Can we have eyes to recognize the gifts that people bring right here and right now? And I think taking an interest in people and in their lives and what's going on right now is the beginning of building relationships where we trust one another and allows us to go a little deeper. It's what Jesus did with the disciples on the road to Emmaus. Tell me what's been going on. Talk to me about what's going on. He takes an interest, he listens, and that opens the door. So and with adults, when I work with adults, it's really a call to recognize people in their what they currently bring, the gifts that they already possess as the starting point for building relationship.
And I think that's an attitude that we as Lasallian educators can take is to look for the things that young people can contribute and to try to create a space where they're able to offer those at their own initiative. And when we can create that kind of environment, I think that there's some really great success stories that can be had. I'm just thinking back to our resurrection liturgy a couple of weeks back, where we actually had a couple of students from our dance program come into the LSL office and basically say to us they were interested in offering some sort of a choreographed piece as a point of reflection for liturgy, totally unsolicited. But the environment had been created where it was okay for them to be able to offer that. and it was absolutely beautiful what they were able to do. So I think part of this is recognizing, as Greg, you say, seeing them as gift right now, but then there's also this creation of an environment where their giftedness can, where they can offer that freely. Other folks, what are you thinking out there?
Hi, this is Marianne. I just want to follow up on that a little bit and affirm everything that's been said. And I guess part of my reflection as you were going through this presentation was, and reflecting on the road to Emmaus, was again, what do we create in terms of that culture, in terms of that environment, so that the young people or the adults that we work with feel comfortable enough, trusting enough to invite us in. Invite us into that deeper level of conversation, that opportunity of offering one's gifts and talents. For those young people to walk in and have that conversation with you, that required a certain amount of vulnerability, on their part. And yet, whatever it was created in the climate of that school environment allowed them to have that vulnerability, in the same way that those disciples had that vulnerability to say to this stranger, well, why don't you come into our house for a while? Like come and join us. And in that act of hospitality, there was the opportunity for a meal. There was the opportunity for the revelation and the miracle to happen. So I guess that sense of hospitality in our accompaniment of the mutual hospitality that happens when we see ourselves together as Lasallians and see ourselves together in this role of missionary disciples, where it's part of our baptismal call, no matter our age or no matter our gender or any other dimensions about us. It's who we are as called to be followers of Christ. So thank you for very thought-provoking. Thank you.
I think one of the wonderful things that I've learned, in this new environment of Lasallian education is just how important accompaniment is. I think that part of what I've discovered is that allowing myself, sometimes pushing myself into just spending time with students actually earns me a platform to be able to share some of the more deeper parts of me with them. Like to have a spiritual conversation with a young person isn't going to be the first introduction to that student. It's going to come after having spent time, after having shared some of our life experience and some of our deeper thoughts and ideas. And eventually that opens the door to something that, that I can share, which is, my faith in Christ. But I do know this much, is that as that accompaniment happens, there's this mutual affirmation of each person that basically gives people permission to get to that vulnerability that you were speaking of. So I think there's something to look at in terms of the quality of our attendance to our accompaniment with young people. It's more than just time. It's how the time is spent.
This is Brother Michael from New Orleans. I'd like to put a plug in for our prayer life as Lasallians. I love the metaphor of the description of our educational mission as accompaniment to other students. And I'm reminded of St. Lasalle's rejoinder to the brothers way back, and that was that we should regularly lift our students to God in prayer. And I find that when we do that, or when I do that, then I am given a new vision of examining how things are with my students, how I am accompanying my students, what is the nature of our relationship, am I in the way or am I helping? Anyway, I just want to put a plug in for active prayer life as one of the tools we use in effective accompaniment effective education with our kids. I think it's a powerful, powerful expression.
That's really awesome, Brother Michael. It actually goes back to the way I started this reflection on Evangelii Gaudium, which was the key question is, what's the quality of your interior life? And if you aren't taking the time to pray, then the zeal for the salvation of souls, I think, is going to wane. We have to keep refreshing ourselves at the source of, or with the source of all that is, in order to sustain ourselves for the challenging journey that the current day and age offers to us, especially with regard to the circumstances that are difficult for our young people, and how we can see ourselves as people who bear the cross with them. I think that there's something very powerful in our ability to do that through prayer and also through presence.
And I would add that, Brother Michael, to me, that prayer aspect speaks to the multifaceted nature of the relational communication. That was something, Stan, that you presented that really struck me, and a recognition I have is the opportunity, I think, or challenge that we are faced with of building the connection with and deepening the relationship with our young people in a manner that can support the interpersonal, or can follow up to the mountaintop experiences that Kenenna described, but also, I think, challenge those of us who did not learn, as students in this multifaceted manner, to continually refine and define ways in which we can approach formation and accompaniment from the variety of multifaceted approaches that young people today have had throughout most of their life. And I think it's a growth for us as educators and as Lasallians to continually expand the many different ways that we're connecting with young people. And I think this platform is one example of many, and I hadn't thought of prayer as another one of those, and I appreciate that insight, Brother Michael. So thank you.
Thanks.
So what are some things out there that people are doing that are working, or things that you want to keep doing because in your estimation they really support and are effective in helping our young people become missionary disciples or participate in missionary discipleship?
Hi, this is Marianne. First, I'd like to say I really liked that reflection, Kenenna, on the rags. Like, what are the different types of rags? I think that's it's a great question for that image. So I thank you for phrasing it that way. One of the things that was mentioned earlier about one of the aspects of Generation Z is looking at that, and it was raised again with Greg in terms of the service learning trips or the mission immersion trips, that they're not just interested in doing, but they're also interested in knowing the why. So it's like, Catholic social teaching, right? The 2 feet, the advocacy and the charity, the justice and the charity. So I guess what I'd like to know is what people are doing effectively in terms of trying to find ways for addressing Generation Z's interest, or addressing and kind of motivating Generation Z in their interest to look at the justice dimension of those questions, the advocacy response to those questions, in addition to doing the immediate response through their great acts of charity and service.
One of the things that we're doing at Justin, at least with regards to the Benevairs that I've had the opportunity to participate in, is I think it's the follow-up piece to the experience is really, really important. Because, as Kenenna said, it's not just about being on the mountaintop and staying at the mountaintop, and it's wonderful that the presence of Christ is right here. But the presence of Christ is in our midst at this moment, and what is that calling us to? And as we reflect back and remember the experience that we had at Benevair, what do we begin to recognize as the injustices that we want to respond to? So for me, it's using this framework to enter into critical dialogue with students about the things that they saw, the things that they felt, the things that they were thinking about during that experience. Because now that we're a couple of weeks removed, you know, the temptation of getting caught up in the fact that it's AP exam week, you know, can move your sights to something totally different. And yet that moment was very powerful. And it isn't a distant memory in terms of I'm just going to put it in a scrapbook, but it's a memory that allows us to be able to still respond. And I think that there's opportunities like that in terms of how we follow up after retreats or service immersions or even project-based learning that can delve into that with greater depth.
Marianne, your question and Stan, the thoughts and reflection you shared thus far, it calls to mind what we heard during our last seminar about not being future focused, making sure that we're not just going from project to project or from thing to thing. And I think in addition to having those opportunities to reflect post experience, to have being future focused during the experience, these different service learning opportunities, and really grounding the reflection that happens while they're at the mountaintop to challenge them to look beyond that experience, to really look at the now what. Yes, I'm having this encounter, I've had this powerful experience, but what follows that? Now what? How will I continue to respond after this time is over?
Are there any other burning thoughts that folks have in reflecting on the presentation or reflecting on your own situational context in your own ministry and using this framework to kind of help us enter into how we can foster missionary discipleship in our young people?
Just a couple of thoughts. It struck me, even though I've heard it 1,000 times, the phrase missionary discipleship, the order of the words, and just how key that is. You know, the experience, then relationship, the experience, and then relationship. And I think thinking of, I'm not sure that Charlotte necessarily mentioned this, but in a couple of similar presentations, the idea that young people need to experience God, you know, before we even begin to talk about anything else, in a sense, you know, when it comes to this kind of area. And so I think that we're very, you know, I think we're very, I would put that under the keep doing category, is I think that we help our young people experience God. I think that we definitely want, you know, walk with them as they try to build that relationship with God. But I think that it's something that we can, you know, we can take further than I think where it's at currently. Just kind of really, you know, digging deep into that sense of that relationship with Christ. But again, that experience and those experiences are so key to that. I think we can't do it, you know, the other way around. You know, I think is you know, not the best evangelization, but to really, you know, on those experiences, how we capitalize and help them use those experiences to be inspired to enter more deeply into that relationship. And kind of on a couple of, to Mary Ann's question about maybe, you know, how do we do this, some of this, you know, two examples that came to my mind, very, very practical, simple examples, but I think they were an attempt without knowing it at doing something like this. At San Miguel in Tucson, we were having issues with this junior class. And it's a relatively small school, so it was about maybe, you know, 70 juniors at the time. And so it really, as faculty began talking about, we kind of talking about this issue with this class, and we were approaching the end of the year, we sort of empowered them with taking responsibility for our Founders Day celebration. Now, I can't say that all went well and great, but I think it was really for them a sense of an experience of trust, of really feeling like they were being empowered to do something meaningful for the school. And I think that that was very unique to how that worked there. And I think, again, the size of the school facilitated that, which is, I think, similar to something we did with our one book, one school project a couple of years ago, where the students read Tattoos on the Heart. And I think a powerful thing that we did was after, we had Father Greg Boyle come out and speak, and this had been really, a lot of things had been happening in leading up to this event. But I think in some ways, more than Father Greg speaking, although I think he inspired it, was the post activity we did to that. We brought the entire student body into the gym, sat them on tables mixed by grade levels, and just had them, kind of discuss what this was saying to them, how this was speaking to them, what they're feeling called to do, and to hear some of their reflections in front of the whole student body as different tables are invited to offer reflections was just truly powerful. So anyways, those were two things that kind of came to mind when the question was thrown out about how do we do some of this.
Well, our time is drawing to a close. Are there any final thoughts that folks have before we wrap things up in prayer? Well, then we want to thank you.
I just want to say thank you for your work putting this together, and Brother Chris for the other ones as well. It's really been a blessing to be part of these. So thank you.
Well, and thank you all for your presence and your participation. We really appreciate the quality and the depth of reflection, especially in terms of the local application. We know that everybody's busy, but we know that everybody's dedicated to the quality of what it is that we do in terms of relationship with young people and the invitation to their belief and discipleship in Jesus. So for you to take time out of your busy schedules and to spend time with us, it's really meaningful to us to be able to share this with you. So thank you for everything that you've shared with us in our time together.
And so as we started remembering that we are in the holy presence of God once again, I invite you, let us remember that we are in the holy presence of God. And what I'm about to read, or these words that we want to leave you with, are from the Founder, Meditation 30, Part 3. A similar happiness will be yours when you willingly converse on holy topics. Jesus Christ, who is in your midst, will give himself to you, and he will communicate his spirit to you. To the degree that you talk about him and about what pertains to him, to that degree you will learn to know him and to appreciate what is good and his holy maxims. St. John Baptiste de Lasalle, pray for us. Live Jesus in our hearts.
Forever.
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 Well, again, thank you, everyone. Again, thank you so much, Stan and Kenenna, for all your work in putting this together, and look forward to continuing to share these. I think they would be a powerful ongoing formation and reflection tool.
Thank you. Thank you all. Blessings.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great night.
Good night, all.
Thank you.
Night.
Thank you. Good night.
He's still there. Okay.
Did you want to talk?
Did you? Are we supposed to?